Tonight, we begin with a development that intelligence officials in Washington, London, and Kiev had feared, anticipated, and quietly prepared for. A development that unfolded not over weeks, not over days, but in 72 hours that changed the strategic calculus on the ground. 72 hours that exposed a vulnerability the Kremlin had desperately tried to hide. 72 hours that forced Russian generals to place an emergency call to Vladimir Putin himself. What Ukraine did this week crossed a line that Moscow had assumed would hold. And when that line broke, when that assumption shattered, Russia did not respond with strength. They responded with panic, with confusion, and with something we rarely see from the Kremlin silence. But Ukraine did not hesitate. They responded with precision, with coordination, and with overwhelming force. And tonight we have the details, we have the leaked communications, we have the analysis. And we have a clearer picture than ever of what Vladimir Putin's biggest weakness truly is, and how Ukraine just exploited it for the entire world to see. For several months now, there had been signals, not official statements, not formal diplomatic cables, just signals that something inside the Russian command structure was shifting in ways that made Western intelligence analysts deeply uncomfortable. Russia has been aggressive, yes, but they have been predictable in their aggression. Their moves have followed a certain logic, a certain rhythm, almost a doctrine. When Russia masses troops, you see it on satellite imagery weeks in advance. When Russia prepares offensive operations, there are telltale signs: increased rail traffic, fuel depot activity, communication spikes between command units. But what set off alarm bells in Washington and in NATO headquarters this month was that the rhythm went silent. The pattern broke. Intelligence analysts who monitor Russian military movements know the indicators: the repositioning of strategic reserve units, the unusual activity at nuclear storage facilities, the sudden reshuffling of command personnel, the movement of mobile air defense systems away from established positions. All of that went quiet. The satellite feeds showed less, not more. The communication intercepts picked up unusual encryption protocols, and the human intelligence sources, the ones embedded in the networks that feed information to Western agencies, stopped reporting. Not because they were compromised, but because there was nothing to report. The machine had gone dark, and whenever Russia goes dark, it means something is about to get loud, very loud. Early Tuesday morning, Ukrainian military intelligence detected what they described as anomalous command activity inside Russian-occupied territory, including a series of encrypted transmissions between forward operating bases and Moscow that had not been observed in over 14 months. These are the kinds of communications that Russia only uses when they are signaling something very specific: an imminent offensive, a major repositioning, or a strategic deception operation. Ukrainian analysts didn't know which category this fell into, or whether it fell into all three at once. But what they did know was that Russia was changing its posture. And when a nuclear-armed adversary shifts its military posture without explanation, even by a small degree, every intelligence agency on the planet pays attention. What came next is what has dominated classified briefings in Washington for the past 48 hours. According to sources who spoke to multiple outlets under strict conditions of anonymity, Ukrainian cyber operations successfully intercepted a series of internal communications between senior Russian military commanders and the Kremlin. The contents of those communications have not been fully disclosed. But what has been confirmed is this: Russian generals, not mid-level officers, not regional commanders, but generals with direct access to Putin, were warning the Russian president that Ukraine had identified and was actively exploiting a critical vulnerability in Russia's military logistics network. A vulnerability so severe that one intercepted communication reportedly described it as, and I'm quoting here, an existential threat to sustained operations in the southern theater. Existential threat. Those are not words you use casually in military communications. Those are not words designed to cover bureaucratic failures. Those are words you use when something has gone catastrophically wrong. The warning issued by the Pentagon tonight was not normal. It was not routine. It was not symbolic. It was urgent. Officials who attended the emergency briefing at the National Security Council described Russia's internal communications as alarming, indicative of severe command dysfunction, and perhaps most importantly, evidence that the Kremlin's grip on operational reality is slipping for months. Analysts have debated whether Putin receives accurate information from his military commanders. Tonight, we have evidence that even when accurate information reaches him, the problems it describes may be beyond his ability to fix. But here's what makes this story even more significant. The warning from Russian generals wasn't just about a problem. It was about what Ukraine was doing to exploit that problem. And Ukraine, understanding that their window of opportunity might be closing, did not hesitate. They did not wait for diplomatic channels. They did not wait for Western approval. They acted. In fact, their response over the past 72 hours has been among the most aggressive, most coordinated, and most strategically significant military operations we've seen since the liberation of Kherson. Here's what we know. Within hours of intercepting those communications, Ukraine launched a series of precision strikes targeting the exact vulnerabilities that Russian generals were warning Putin about. These weren't random attacks on Russian positions. These weren't symbolic gestures designed for media consumption. These were surgical operations using a combination of domestically produced long-range drones, Western-supplied precision munitions, and real-time intelligence coordination that struck at the heart of Russia's ability to sustain its military operations. Tonight, Ukrainian military officials confirmed that their forces launched coordinated strikes on at least 17 high-value targets deep inside Russian-occupied territory and, in several cases, inside Russia itself. These targets included a major fuel storage facility in Crimea that had recently been reinforced with additional air defense systems, suggesting Russia knew it was vulnerable but couldn't adequately protect it. Ukraine struck it before those defenses were fully operational. They hit the fuel depot. They hit the adjacent ammunition storage site. They hit the rail junction 3 kilometers away that was the primary resupply route for Russian forces operating in the Zaporizhzhia sector. They hit a command post in Luhansk that was reportedly coordinating logistics for the entire Eastern Front. They hit a naval support facility near Sevastopol that had been quietly reactivated in the past 2 weeks. And perhaps most significantly, they hit a communications relay station that analysts believe was serving as a key node in Russia's encrypted military communication network. In other words, Ukraine didn't just attack Russian forces. They attacked Russia's ability to command those forces. They attacked Russia's ability to supply those forces. They attacked Russia's ability to coordinate those forces. This is what made the Russian generals' warning so urgent. They knew this vulnerability existed. They knew Ukraine was aware of it. And they knew that if Ukraine acted decisively, Russia would face a cascading series of operational failures that could take weeks, possibly months, to recover from. Ukraine acted decisively, not recklessly, not impulsively, but strategically. They didn't waste missiles on symbolic targets. They didn't attack population centers to make political statements. They hit logistics hubs that feed the Russian war machine. They hit communication nodes that coordinate the Russian war effort. They hit the infrastructure that allows Russia to continue this war. And they did it with a level of precision that suggests their intelligence on Russian vulnerabilities was not just good, it was exceptional. And here's where the story becomes even more consequential. Intelligence analysts now believe that Russia's latest troop movements, the ones that went dark on satellite imagery, were designed to test the responsiveness of Ukrainian defense systems after months of attritional warfare. Russia wanted to see whether Ukraine had been weakened. They wanted to see whether Western support was flagging. They wanted to see whether Kyiv would respond slowly, cautiously, or not at all. But instead, the opposite happened. Ukraine didn't respond slowly. They responded with a speed and precision that was so immediate, so devastating, that even Moscow noticed. You don't get the Kremlin's attention easily. Their propaganda machine is designed to minimize Ukrainian successes and exaggerate Russian strength. But today, even Russian military bloggers, the ones who typically amplify Kremlin talking points, were asking uncomfortable questions. How did Ukraine know where to strike? How did they penetrate air defenses that were supposed to be impenetrable? How did they coordinate attacks across such a wide geographic area simultaneously? The answer, according to Western intelligence officials speaking under anonymity, is that Ukraine has developed what one analyst described as asymmetric intelligence dominance, a capacity to see inside Russian operations that exceeds Russia's ability to hide them. But Ukraine proved today that they are not merely surviving this war. They are adapting, they are innovating, they are fighting smarter. Their strikes were not only accurate, they were timed so precisely that Russian air defense systems were overwhelmed before they could respond effectively. But timing matters because it shows something the Kremlin does not want the world to know. It shows that Ukraine is not just reacting to Russian moves, they are anticipating them. They are inside Russia's decision-making cycle, and that is Vladimir Putin's biggest weakness. As reports continued coming in throughout the day, we learned more about the scale of Ukraine's response. Ukrainian drone units carried out overnight strikes on at least 6 fuel depots across occupied territory, forcing Russian logistics convoys to halt operations and reroute through secondary roads that are already degraded from months of heavy military traffic. Ukrainian Special Operations Forces targeted a Russian electronic warfare installation that had been upgraded in the last 30 days, suggesting Ukraine's intelligence on Russian modernization efforts is current and actionable. Ukrainian naval drones operating in the Black Sea reportedly struck a Russian supply vessel that was transporting ammunition to forward positions in Crimea. Ukrainian artillery units using precision-guided munitions provided by Western allies destroyed 3 Russian ammunition storage sites in a single coordinated barrage. This wasn't just harassment. This wasn't just attrition. This was systematic degradation. This was strategic paralysis. And strategic paralysis is the one thing Russia has struggled to overcome since the early months of this invasion. For every kilometer of territory they have gained, Ukraine has countered with something that makes holding that territory exponentially more difficult. For every logistic solution Russia has improvised, Ukraine has found a way to disrupt it. For every command structure Russia has reorganized, Ukraine has found a way to penetrate it. This is the reality that Russian generals were warning Putin about. And this is the reality that Ukraine demonstrated in devastating fashion over the past 72 hours. Remember, Russia thought this war would last 3 days. They thought Ukraine would collapse. They thought Kyiv would fall. They thought Zelensky would flee. They thought Western support would be symbolic at best. They thought NATO would fracture under the pressure of energy costs and refugee flows. They thought their military would be welcomed as liberators in parts of Ukraine. They thought wrong. And tonight, the exact opposite of everything Russia predicted is happening. Ukraine is stronger militarily than it was a year ago. Western support has increased, not decreased. NATO has expanded, adding Finland and Sweden to its ranks. Russian equipment losses have been catastrophic. Independent analysts estimate over 10,000 armored vehicles destroyed or captured. Russian personnel losses have been staggering. Even conservative estimates suggest over 300,000 casualties since the invasion began. And Russian morale, according to intercepted communications and prisoner debriefings, is at historic lows. This is not what Putin expected. This is not what his generals promised him. And tonight, the gap between Kremlin expectations and battlefield reality has never been wider. What makes this moment so significant and so dangerous is that Russia's latest move happened at a time when Vladimir Putin is under extraordinary internal pressure. Russian hardliners want escalation. They want full mobilization. They want Russia to use every tool at its disposal to crush Ukrainian resistance, regardless of international consequences. Russian oligarchs want de-escalation. They want sanctions relief. They want their yachts back. They want access to Western financial systems restored. Russian military commanders want resources. They want more troops, more equipment, more ammunition. They want the tools to actually win on the battlefield, not just hold territory. Russian intelligence services want accountability. They're tired of being blamed for failures that originated in military incompetence and political miscalculation. The Russian public, at least the portion that hasn't been fully captured by state propaganda, wants the war to end. They want their sons and husbands to come home. Putin is balancing these demands while simultaneously trying to project strength to the international community. And when leaders in that position make sudden, aggressive moves, they're not doing it from strength. They're doing it from pressure. They're doing it from vulnerability. They're doing it because they feel the walls closing in, and that makes them unpredictable. That makes them dangerous. Washington's statement, now being circulated through diplomatic channels worldwide, was designed to signal that the United States is not willing to allow Russian aggression to succeed. Administration officials said plainly that Russia's recent military posture changes were inconsistent with stated commitments to de-escalation and diplomatic resolution. That is diplomatic language for, we see what you're doing, and we're not going to let it work. You don't usually hear that tone from the State Department. unless something serious is at stake. The Pentagon followed with its own statement, confirming that American intelligence assets had detected concerning patterns of Russian military activity, and that the United States was in close coordination with Ukrainian partners and NATO allies. Close coordination. That phrase matters. It means information sharing is happening in real time. It means targeting data is being passed through secure channels. It means Ukraine is not fighting alone and Russia knows it. Britain, France, and Germany issued coordinated statements within hours, expressing unwavering support for Ukraine and grave concern about Russian actions. The message from the West was unified and unambiguous. This will not stand. Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed his nation in a defiant, measured speech tonight. He said, "They thought we would break. We did not break. We struck back," he said. "Every missile they fire at our cities, we answer with precision. Every threat they make, we answer with action." And he said, "The world is watching, history is watching, and we will not give them the victory they expected." These are not rhetorical flourishes. These are statements from a wartime leader who understands just how high the stakes have become. Zelensky has transformed from a comedian and actor into one of the most consequential leaders of the 21st century. And tonight, his message was clear. Ukraine will not negotiate from weakness. Ukraine will not accept territorial concessions under military pressure. Ukraine will fight. Here's what makes the situation even more concerning. Russia's latest move wasn't isolated. Along with the troop repositioning and command activity that triggered this crisis, Belarus conducted unannounced military exercises near the Ukrainian border, forcing Kiev to divert attention and resources to its northern frontier. Russian naval forces in the Black Sea increased patrol activity, testing Ukrainian coastal defenses and gathering intelligence on port operations. Russian cyber units launched a coordinated attack on Ukrainian government communication systems, attempting to disrupt command and control during a critical operational window. Pro-Russian propaganda channels amplified disinformation, claiming that Ukraine was preparing provocations, a common precursor to Russian escalation. All of this happened within the same 72-hour period. When Russia moves multiple pieces simultaneously across the military, cyber, and information domains, it means something larger is underway. It means this wasn't spontaneous, it was planned, it was coordinated, and it failed. Intelligence analysts are now considering several possibilities about what Russia was attempting. One is that Russia was preparing for a major offensive operation, possibly targeting Ukrainian energy infrastructure ahead of winter, possibly aimed at breaking through defensive lines that have held for months. Another is that Russia was attempting to test Western commitment to see whether the United States and its allies would respond to provocative behavior with strength or with calls for negotiation. A third possibility, the one worrying officials the most, is that Russia was attempting to create conditions for escalation, to manufacture a crisis that would justify more extreme measures, potentially including tactical nuclear threats or attacks on NATO supply lines. But today, Ukraine took that card off the table. They didn't wait to see what Russia would do. They didn't hesitate while the international community debated. They didn't give Putin time to escalate on his terms. They struck first. They struck hard. And they struck in ways that degraded Russia's ability to follow through on whatever they were planning. What we're watching now is a test of resolve. Russia wants to see whether the world will grow tired of supporting Ukraine. Ukraine wants to show that they are worthy of that support, that Western investment in their defense is producing results. Washington wants to prevent escalation to direct NATO-Russia conflict, and Europe wants to prevent this war from destabilizing the continent further. All of these interests are now converging on a single question: what happens next? Does Russia back down? Does Russia escalate? Does the West hold firm? Does Ukraine maintain its momentum? The answers to these questions will shape not just this conflict, but the international order for decades to come. Tonight, we've heard from intelligence officials who are now monitoring Russian communication channels for signs of the Kremlin's next move. They say Russian command traffic has spiked dramatically in the past 12 hours, suggesting internal debate, possibly panic. They say there are indications that several senior Russian military officials have been summoned to Moscow for emergency consultations. And they say Russia's decision to go dark before this operation was likely part of a broader strategy intended to catch Ukraine off guard and demonstrate that Russia could still achieve surprise on the battlefield. But Ukraine was not caught off guard. In fact, Ukraine was waiting. Their response today, swift, precise, and devastating, sent a message to Moscow that the element of surprise now belongs to Kyiv. And it sent a message to Washington, London, and Brussels that their support is being used effectively. Every HIMARS system, every Storm Shadow missile, every piece of intelligence, every dollar of aid, it's working. As the week continues, we expect more details to emerge about what exactly Russia hoped to achieve with this operation. But what we do know is that Ukraine's response was timely. It prevented Russia from executing whatever they were planning. It demonstrated Ukrainian capability at a moment when some were questioning it. And it exposed, once again, that Russia's military machine is far more vulnerable than Kremlin propaganda suggests. What happens next will depend on what Moscow does in the coming days and weeks. If they de-escalate, this moment will be remembered as another failed Russian gambit, another example of Putin overreaching and paying the price. If they escalate further, Ukraine and its allies have already shown they are prepared. They have shown they are watching. They have shown they are ready to respond. And tonight, for the first time in months, Russia appears to be uncertain. The Kremlin is quiet. Too quiet. Too quiet. And when Moscow is quiet, it means they are recalculating. It means they are reassessing. It means they are choosing their next move very, very carefully. Because tonight, Vladimir Putin learned something he has learned many times before, but never quite this clearly: Ukraine will not break. The West will not abandon them. And his biggest weakness, the gap between what he believes and what is real, has been exposed for the entire world to see. And Russia, despite all its threats, despite all its propaganda, despite all its nuclear saber rattling, is losing. And we will be here watching every detail as the next phase of this historic conflict unfolds.